you had known Stockton Rice for a long time, a decade long,
Yeah.
and
No, I had considered him a friend. I'd been on 2 submarine dives with him, including the second deep dive of Titan. I've been to his house. I met his family. He let me drive his car. Anytime that we were at the conference together, we would go out for meals together. So,
and how deep did you go in the second in the second dive?
um, something like 12,500 feet. We were basically trying to test it for Titanic depth, and I think we were maybe 400 feet shallower than the Titanic when we turned back.
And did you turn back because of anything that particularly scared you, or just because uh, that was your aim at
From
that
what I
point?
recall, the bottom was sloping very gently, and we would have had to keep driving, basically in the interest of time.
Oh, okay. And how was that dive? Did you ever feel um, that anything was wrong, or that you could be in danger at any point?
Um, so he told us ahead of time that it was going to make loud noises, which he compared to fireworks ahead of time, based off his previous experience of doing one dive by himself. And sure enough, when we started getting deeper, the sub was making loud noises, which was carbon fiber bands breaking, which I compared to small caliber gunshots. And yeah, it was unnerving when you're down there and you're hearing those kind of sounds. Uh, but it's a completely different dynamic with 4 people versus being in there by yourself, or being the captain versus being a pilot. It was a new experience for me, and he there are a couple things that, in retrospect, are indicators that he knew there was much greater risk than he was letting on. One of them is, that sub was for 5 people, but there was only 4 of us in there, and there were 100 people waiting on shore that some of them would have paid a lot of money to be in there with us, but he didn't want a 5th person. I think he knew that
That it could go
that
wrong.
wasn't right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that it shouldn't be making noises like that.
yeah.
And he tried to play it cool, that it was no big deal. But when he had been down there by himself, he was not able to isolate where the breaking sounds were coming from. And when the 4 of us were in there, after a while, uh, I identified an exact spot where the sounds were coming from, which it's yeah. And the other big indicator was he offered the controller to me to drive.
Hmm.
He did not offer that to the other passengers, and the other 2 passengers really didn't have any submersible experience.
Makes sense.
One was a 20-something-year-old technician from a sonar company, and the other one was a childhood friend of his that uh, uh, was an executive in the company, but had no real background with submersibles. I believe now that he gave me the controller because he realized I had the most awareness of the situation we were in, and he kind of wanted me to be in control of my own destiny if we were to live or die. I
Wow.
remember too that the sounds were uh, regular enough that the bottom was very gently sloping, and looking out that window, you couldn't exactly. It was a little bit distorting. It had a uh, convex exterior, so it's a little bit hard, the optics of it, and I didn't need to pay attention to the compass. I could literally drive towards deeper water by which way were the breaking sounds getting louder and more frequent.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you knew in the spot that that was breaking, that something was breaking.
It was definitely, the thing is that at that time I had no reason to believe, and I did not realize that he was capable of flat out lying. Since the implosion, I've seen stories. Well, for example, the fact that he would take people's money and then refuse to return it when he failed to deliver on what he had promised, or the fact that he grossly overstated his relationships with Boeing and NASA and University of Washington. Like, I had no way of knowing for sure that he was that kind of untruthful person. So when he told me things like, I've done enough model testing, you don't know what you're talking about, I've studied this much more than you have, I had no reason to believe that he was just lying to me. And all the evidence I see now is he never even tested it more than 10% over pressure.
So you, when you take the control of the Titan, did you you were still going down, or were you already going up, or did you decide?
It was when we reached the bottom, and then he let me drive it along the bottom into deeper water.
Okay. And did you ever say, when you were with him 12,000 feet underwater, we should go up because this, if it's breaking, this could implode, or we could die here?
I didn't. So one of the more disturbing parts about the dive was that it was still making noise on the way back up, even as shallow as 300 feet, which it took me, I didn't want to like panic or rush to my judgment of him. But after that dive, I wrote him email that I spent a lot of time choosing my wording, and then there was follow-up emails over the course of, I want to say, a couple months. And I told him that it sounded like the hull was decaying in one area, and that the only question in my mind was if the failure was going to be catastrophic or survivable, but it was going to fail. And more than anything, even if he thought it wasn't going to fail, he did not have a marketable product, because you could not charge people to be in a submarine that was making those kinds of noises and not expect that 1 out of the 4 passengers would start freaking out and demand to go back to the surface.
Yeah,
And in addition to that, he also had extremely little experience. He was willing to actually start taking paying passengers into the middle of the North Atlantic on deep dive number 5. And I don't even think he had a single dive that had not had a major system failure. So I also made the point to him, if you're charging somebody 6 figures and you get down there and this breaks or that breaks and they only get a glimpse of the Titanic, or like, what's your refund policy?
Yeah.
And he basically changed that later to, you don't get a refund, period. You only get a chance of doing it again the next year. And, you're stuck out at sea for 10 days on a boat. It's not exactly, for some of these very wealthy people, being 10 days in the middle of nowhere on a boat is not something to be taken lightly.